Good morning, everyone. This is Tripulka Kadiante presentation of the topic 7, Behaviorism by Pavlov, Thorndike, Watson, and B.F. Skinner. Before that, let us define what is behaviorism. So, behaviorism theory surmises that human and animal behavior can only be explained by conditioning. So, behaviorists believe that psychology should focus on measurable and observable behavior, physical behaviors, and how these behaviors can be manipulated by changes in the external environment. Also, they said that there is no room in behaviorist theory for thoughts or emotions in contrast to other theories of psychology. It is often said that all behaviors are learned through interactions with environment, and also others said that this is innate or inherited factors. So my question is, do you believe on that? If you say so, let us continue. So we have here the four main psychologists who lead to the development of behaviorist theory. The first one is Ivan Petrovich Pavlov, second, John Watson, third, Edward Thorndike, and lastly, B.F. Skinner. So Pavlov lived in 1849 until 1936. And Ivan Petrovich Pavlov was the first to introduce the concept of conditioning through his experiments with animals, or so-called the classical conditioning. So he is the first to introduce this conditioning. So why do you think Pavlov had the idea? So let's move on to the next slide and find out. Oh, Pavlov had a dog. And he observes that every time he feeds his dog, it started to salivate. So this dog, he began to experiment with the presence of food because he believed that this response is innate, or in Tagalog, likas, or yung natural na behavior ng isang aso. So he observed this by displaying an unconditioned response, which is a salivation, to an unconditioned stimulus, which is the food. So I have here a chart of so-called classical conditioning. We have here three parts. First one is the before conditioning, second, during conditioning, and lastly, the after conditioning. So before conditioning, as you can see on the first experiment, Pavlov worked with dogs that like most, and the dog salivated naturally in the presence of food. So the second part of this first part of conditioning, he began to create a metronome sound. This part is separate to the first, to the unconditioned stimulus. So now, he tried on the first part to use a neutral stimulus. This neutral stimulus is the metronome sound. This one, the whistle. So first, let us define what is a neutral stimulus. So neutral stimulus is a stimulus which initially produces no specific response. So there is no specific response to the dog other than focusing attention. So now that we have already defined the neutral stimulus, let us continue during conditioning, or the second part of this chart. So Pavlov then, for the sake of experimentation, began to produce a metronome sound at the time of each feeding. So we already have the conditioned stimulus, unconditioned stimulus, the food, the neutral stimulus, the food. The neutral stimulus is the whistle or the metronome sound, and result to an unconditioned response. So unconditioned response, according to classical conditioning, it is an unlearned response that occurs naturally in reaction to unconditioned stimulus. So for example, if the smell of food is unconditioned stimulus, the feeling of hunger in response to the smell of food is the unconditioned stimulus. Lastly, the third part, after conditioning, eventually the dog started to drool after hearing it and in anticipation of food when none was present. So it means that in classical conditioning, when you use together with an unconditioned stimulus with the neutral stimulus, will become a conditioned response. So once the dog associates the conditioned stimulus with the unconditioned response, it becomes a conditioned response. So this is the result of the after conditioning. So specific type of food now produces nausea, and the bells or the metronome sound or the whistle created the salivation. So conclusion of Pavlov. Concluding, it can be stated that Pavlov's discovery of conditional reflexes while studying digestion in dogs lead to a systematic investigation of learning processes and established the principles of classical conditioning. So for example, if a metronome sound was sounded repeatedly and no food was presented, dogs would eventually stop associating the two, and their drooling response to the sound would vanish. So his conclusion really influenced Watson and provided him with the original scientific basis for his beliefs.